So if I asked you if you could list out the top 10 most negative beliefs that you hold implicitly or explicitly that you're aware of, would you be able to do that? In this video, you're going to do that. By the end of this video, you're going to know at least the top 10 negative limiting beliefs that are probably affecting you in more ways than you realize. So we're going to talk about overcoming our negative thinking bias in this video and why that's so important beyond, it's obviously it sounds important, right? We've heard this in many contexts. We know about it, but we want to dig in a lot deeper to the core reasons why and how this is actually affecting your life. So let's start with why. Number one, this is probably, it's a core skill. It may be the most core skill we need if we are going to experience what we want to in this lifetime. Okay, it's time to get serious. It's time to get tactical. Why? Why would that be? Because the default operation of the universe is entropy. And this also applies to our thinking and our internal experience. Entropy within the social human experience takes on the form of reductive thinking. And I've done a couple of videos at least on this already, which I'm going to try to link right here. Reductive thinking is at the core of operationalist thinking and functionalist thinking, functionalism in general. If this is the only thing that's taking place, you or the group or the organization or the whole collective is on a downward spiral. If this is the only thing that's taking place, you need to have more negentropy than you do entropic forces, okay? As I just said, if we don't actively counteract these kinds of intrinsic entropic forces, then all we're doing is just creating more of the same, and the same biases. We're working with the same reductions. Think of the classical Newtonian law, of course, right? An object in motion is going to stay in motion unless there's some kind of like countervailing force upon it. And it's not just an object, right? This means you can talk about a force field in the same way. A trajectory is going to remain with the momentum it has, minus the countervailing forces that are acting upon it or within it. Now, when we talk about creating the life that we want, what we're really talking about is literally manifesting, right? Manifest means to bring into presence, to bring into physicality. So one of the core blocks, if you will, to our ability to manifest is really, it's the same thing as talking about the ways in which our limiting beliefs are affecting the quality of life that we experience and whether this is the kind of life that we want to experience, right? We get to choose on very, very deep levels. And so, yes, one of the very core blocks to this manifestation process is literally the deep-rooted beliefs that we have stored in our subconscious mind, which is not just an abstract mind. There are some beliefs that are just so deeply held or that were internalized so early on at such a young age that these really do kind of sit on a physiological level. These are very deep layers. So these are, again, some of the earliest impressions or early judgments that we may have made about ourselves and the world and the way that the world relates to us, which is internalized as something about us. And so these deepest beliefs they may look less like beliefs of the form, X is Y, like a kind of statement like that, like a perceptual judgment about the world. This level of belief is so deep that it's going to be more like an energetic baseline. It's going to be more like the shape of your energy, the shape of where you feel safe investing energy or moving energy, so to speak. Again, so very, very core. And to kind of like simplify this, you can think of it kind of like there's three concentric circles, and the outer circle is, let's say, beliefs about the world. And so if you are very high on judgment, if you are very quick to jump to conclusions, to make judgments, to rely on your own judgments, if that's very strong in your psyche, you may have some very hardwired beliefs about the world that you will draw on without question. You will rarely question them, or you will rarely admit someone else's a different belief on that same subject. So, for example, some of these are like deeply held so-called worldviews, and so you may hear someone say things like, life isn't fair, or fill in the ones that you hear about the way some people think what the world is, or women are like this, these kinds of very general statements. So that's like the outer ring. That's like the most judgmental ring, I would say. Then we move inside, and then we're talking about the ways in which we feel we relate to the world and how the world or other people relate to us. So all of the relational judgments. And so in here, you can get a lot of the voices that from things that your parents said, and maybe you were very unlucky and you had a parent who called you, ugly at a very young age, or worse, or things like, who would ever want to be in a relationship with you? So a lot of internalized voices on that middle level. And then, of course, the core is just your own beliefs about yourself. And this is very complex. There are layers to this too. There is more of like I would call it like a personality layer. So this is about self-identity in terms of like what we were praised for socially, even from an early age, and it became part of that layer of our identity. The ways, literally, identity is like what you believe about yourself. And so these could be things like, wow, you're so funny. You're like naturally funny and you make people laugh. Or you're just naturally intelligent and that's how everyone treats you. Or, you have such and such an ability. You're like a natural athlete or something. And these are very social types of descriptions. They have social values. An internal layer, further deeper than that, of course, is more like our own higher ideas about who we really are, that we learn more over time. Maybe, but we were already like living that at a young age, of course. Some of the things that we are praised for are intrinsic and innate and belong to our higher self. So in this category, it may be, the ways in which you actually perceive yourself, whether or not maybe that's even showing up in the 3D yet. Maybe you haven't been able to fully actualize some aspect of yourself yet. Um, it could be, or maybe you already are in alignment with one of these aspects. And so it is that part of your personality is actually in coherence with this aspect of your essential self, let's say. And this too, right? You'll know the difference when you're talking about like your higher identity, your higher self versus your personality. And then there's like the core of the core. These A lot of this is like fear. This is where fear comes into play. And again, not as like mental beliefs where, you could write this down as like, oh, I believe such and such and such, and that's why I'm afraid. This type of fear is more like an energetic imprint, like an energetic gestalt that kind of like kicks in, like you can trip the wire once you're in a certain situation, or maybe you're like progressing a bit further than you ever have before, and this kind of thing will come up and kind of like an elastic, and it will snap you back to your energetic baseline. So this is where a lot of self-sabotaging can come in, completely unconscious. You would never expect it or predict it or choose it. It's just literally like a physiological response to, moving past your own energetic baseline, I would say. Okay, so let's just take a little review here, and you can think about the kinds of limiting beliefs you might have, or even the degree of judgment. Let's start there, that you may already be working with. For example, think about when you check the weather, when you go to check the weather report, how easily or how deeply do you believe, for example, what the weather is going to be like tomorrow? This is just an example. I'm not using this to like doubt meteorology. This is more like, for example, in my area, I know how rapidly the weather can actually change. So it's not about like doubting the weather science, but it's just the fact that in my area, if the weather report is like 2 days out, I don't really rely on that. Like, I will pay attention, but I know from experience how quickly it can actually change. And so, but then you will have people who will like stick really hard to that. And even like 5 days out, they're planning for, it says it's going to rain. And then they're making really hard plans about it's going to rain on Thursday. And that's like 5 days out. So that's just like one little quick test you can do. There's others. You will have a sense of like how adaptable and how easy it is for you to update your own judgments. Now, another way to think about this too is like, especially when we're talking about the self and your beliefs about yourself, your core identity, what you really want to do, you want to release judgment. That's what this is all about, right? Fixing limiting beliefs, amending our beliefs, creating more expansive beliefs so that we can bring in more possibility. This is all rooted in being able to like release more judgment and the judgmental drive. And how do we do that? It's kind of like there's a competing force here, right? It's like a little balance. And the more self-love you can bring in, the easier it is to like release all of these. I almost want to call it like a will to judgment, so to speak. It's not about like having specific judgments, but it's about like the propensity to try to like fix and control energy, so to speak. So the more love that you are able to receive and embody and emit, really acts as like a nice counterbalance, and it's gonna like kind of correct that propensity. This is one way to work with it. Okay, so at this point, let's just take a moment here in a second, and I'm going to get you to write down some of these negative beliefs, these limiting beliefs that you work with. They may not even overtly seem negative, but they're just limiting in the sense that they're imposing a kind of identity or, again, a judgment on something that may be part of your experience or your experience of the external world. And that type of judgment is actually, there's consequences to it, right? And so that's what we want to look at. So what I want you to do first is you're going to really kind of tune back into what it is you're really trying to work on or bring into your life experience, what you're really hoping to do next, achieve next, be next, where you're really trying to go. This is going to be different depending on what stage of life you're in and what you've already done, of course, but you have a sense of like some of the most intimate, most immediate areas that you are trying to manifest in your experience. Now, when you're really tuned into that, you're going to start thinking about all of the other kinds of like countervailing beliefs that start coming in that kind of like represent resistance to that. So for this exercise, just maybe try to think of like one main thing that it is that you're trying to like bring into your experience. And so in a second, I'll just get you to pause the video and take a few moments to really list down, try to come up with like 10 limiting beliefs or just 10, whatever the negative thoughts are that seem to come up when you think about actually having or being or moving into that experience as a reality about your life. So you can pause the video now, take as long as you need, and really fill out that list. Come up with like 10 things, you can add to them, and then we're going to come back, okay? So I'll give you a few minutes right now. Okay, so we're back, and you should have a list now of at least 10 of these limiting kinds of beliefs. And what this is now is this is really going to be material for your own inner work, homework, so to speak. And there's two things that I'm going to get you to do to work on this. The first is that for each item in this list, you want to take some time to reflect on it, and then you're going to write down, you're going to ask yourself the question, why? Why do I believe that? Or depending on what you wrote, why would I believe that? Or the belief is like XYZ, why? Why do why would that be true? And just write down whatever comes up. And then once you have that list, part two is going to be in another column, let's say, to come up with like some action that you can take that provides kind of like a countervailing evidence to this belief. this judgment. So let's say you have an implicit, maybe you have an internalized image of yourself that came from things that one of your parents said to you. One of your actions, you need to take an action that's explicitly like opposed to that, which is actually in the direction of like who you would be when you do have this experience that you really want, this quality of life that you really want, and literally to start enacting that, right? So the task though is first to come up with just the list of these countervailing actions that can provide counter evidence for that limiting belief. Because again, this is just about releasing the judgment, and this is going to be one way that you can start dissolving those judgments. Does that make sense? So let me know in the comments any questions that this brings up, any experience that you've had working on this for yourself with manifestation, or just specifically with trying to work really hard on very specific beliefs that are like stored deeply in your system, or maybe you haven't really done a lot of this work yet. I would love to hear. And let me know in the comments, for example, what negative belief, what limiting belief may be very pernicious in your psychic history, and how you're going to work to try to counteract that. For example, maybe you internalized voices from your parents, or who told you, who made you feel, for example, maybe you have this schema that you're like an angry, bitter person, or and you don't do well in relationships, or maybe you have an internalized schema that maybe you don't feel beautiful, you don't feel attractive, and so you want to take actions that will really provide the counter evidence for you to really like challenge that belief, because so many of these are just inherited. So let me know if that helps. And again, write down your experience in the comments, and we're going to come back to this and we'll talk again. So thanks.